The ground shook beneath my feet. A violent roar tearing through the air as steel groaned and concrete shattered. I stumbled, heart pounding, the world blurring into a haze of dust and chaos. Somewhere in the collapsing skeleton of the old Brooklyn warehouse, a stranger's scream pierced my soul, pulling me toward a choice I never expected to make. My name's Ethan Caldwell, a 28-year-old paramedic who'd seen his share of disasters. But nothing like this. It was supposed to be a routine call reports of a gas leak in an abandoned industrial complex. The fire department was on scene. But when the first explosion hit, the whole place started coming down like a house of cards. I was outside, prepping the ambulance, when the second blast sent me sprinting toward the inferno, my instincts overriding every shred of common sense. Inside, the air was thick with ash, the heat searing my lungs. I heard him before I saw Hima's desperate cry from beneath a pile of rubble. Help. Please. The voice was raw, trembling, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I clawed through debris, my hands bleeding, until I found him, a guy about my age, pinned under a fallen beam, his face pale but striking, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like a stormy sea. His name, I'd later learn, was Lucas Reed. Hold on, I grunted, shoving my shoulder against the beam. It wouldn't budge, but his eyes locked onto mine, wide with fear and something that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I'm getting you out, I promised, though I had no idea how. The building groaned again, a death rattle that said we didn't have much time. Lucas's hand grabbed mine, his grip surprisingly strong. You don't have to do this, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the chaos. You don't even know me. Doesn't matter. I shot back, adrenaline surging. I braced my legs and pushed harder, every muscle screaming. The beam shifted, just enough, and I yanked him free, his body collapsing against mine. For a split second, our faces were inches apart, his breath warm against my cheek, his eyes searching mine like he was seeing me for the first time. Then the ceiling above us buckled, and I shoved him toward the exit, my vision swimming as something heavy struck my head. I woke to the sound of sirens, my head throbbing, Lucas's face hovering over me. We were outside, sprawled on the wet pavement, rain mixing with the blood on his cheek. He was shaking, his hand clutching mine like a lifeline. You saved me, he whispered, his voice breaking. But then, as my eyes started to close again, he leaned closer, his lips brushing my ear. I'm not who you think I am, he said, so softly I almost missed it. I'm the reason this place went down. Darkness swallowed me before I could process his words. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic stinging my nose. My head felt like it had been split open, but I was alive. Lucas was gone. No trace of him in the room or the hospital records. The nurses said I'd been found alone, dragged out by a firefighter just before the warehouse collapsed completely. But I knew what I'd heard. His voice, his confession, it haunted me. I spent the next week recovering, my mind replaying that moment under the rubble. Who was Lucas Reed? Why would he say something so cryptic, so damning? And why did I feel this pull toward him, like some invisible thread had tethered us together in that burning chaos? I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way they'd held mine, or the way his touch had felt like a spark in the dark. Against my better judgment, I started digging. New York's a big city, But I had connections: paramedics, cops, even a hacker friend from my old neighborhood in Queens. Lucas Reed wasn't a ghost, but he was close. No social media, no public records, just a name that popped up in a single article about a protest outside the warehouse a year ago. The place had been owned by a shady real estate conglomerate, Vantage Corp, accused of cutting corners on safety to maximize profits. The protesters, including someone named Lucas, had been demanding accountability after a worker died on site. Was that him? And if so, what did he mean about being the reason the place went down? I tracked down an address tied to the protest group, a rundown community center in Bed-Stuy. When I showed up, the place was buzzing with activists, their voices loud with passion and anger. I scanned the room, my heart skipping when I spotted him, Lucas, leaning against a wall, his blue eyes catching the dim light. He looked different, less broken, but still carried that haunted edge. When he saw me, his expression flickered surprise, then something softer, almost like relief. "You're alive," he said, crossing the room in a few quick strides. Up close, he was even more striking, his dark hair falling messily over his forehead, his jaw set with a quiet intensity. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "You left me in that hospital," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "After dropping a bomb like that. I'm the reason this place went down. What the hell?" "Lucas." His face paled, and he glanced around, lowering his voice. "Not here. Please, Ethan. Just let me explain somewhere else." Against every rational instinct, I followed him to a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away. Over steaming mugs, he told me his story, or at least part of it. Lucas was an activist, part of a group fighting Vantage Corp's corruption. The warehouse was one of their targets, a symbol of greed that had cost lives. He'd been there that night to plant evidence, documents proving Vantage's negligence, hoping to spark an investigation. But something went wrong: a gas line he didn't know about, a spark he didn't mean to ignite. The explosion wasn't planned, but he blamed himself for it. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I screwed up. And you almost died because of me. I should have been angry. I should have walked away. But sitting there, watching the way his hands trembled around his coffee cup, the way his eyes searched mine for forgiveness, I felt something else. Compassion. Connection. Maybe even something more. "I saved you for a reason," I said finally. "I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not letting you carry this alone." He looked at me like I'd just offered him salvation. And in that moment, I knew I was in deeper than I'd ever been with anyone. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and late-night talks. Lucas and I met whenever we could, always in secret alleyway diners, empty parks, the back of my ambulance between shifts. There was a pull between us, magnetic and undeniable, but it was laced with danger. Vantage Corp wasn't just a faceless company. They had eyes everywhere, and Lucas was on their radar. His confession had opened a door to a world I didn't belong in, but I couldn't walk away, not from him. One night, under the flickering lights of a subway station, he kissed me. It was sudden, desperate, his hands cupping my face as if I might vanish. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against my lips, his voice raw with emotion. I kissed him back, harder, letting him know I wasn't going anywhere. But even as my heart raced, his words from the warehouse echoed in my mind. I'm the reason this place went down. What else was he hiding? The deeper I got, the more I realized Lucas was a paradox, a man who burned with conviction but was drowning in guilt. He'd been fighting Vantage for years, ever since his older brother died in one of their unsafe buildings. That loss had shaped him, turned him into someone who'd risk everything to expose the truth. But it also made him reckless, and I was starting to see the cracks. One evening, he showed up at my apartment, soaked from the rain, his eyes wild. "They know," he said, pacing my tiny living room. "Vantage. They've got people following me. I saw one of their guys outside the community center." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Following you?" "Lucas, this is serious. You need to go to the police." He laughed, a bitter sound. "The police. Half of them are in Vantage's pocket. Ethan, you don't get it. This is bigger than us. They'll do anything to keep their secrets buried." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "Then let me help you. We'll figure this out together." His eyes softened, and for a moment, he leaned into my touch, his forehead resting against mine. "You're too good for this," he whispered. "Too good for me." "Stop it," I said, my voice firm. "I'm in this, Lucas. All the way." That night, he stayed over, and we lay together in the dark, his head on my chest, my fingers tracing circles on his back. It was the first time I felt like we were more than just two people caught in a storm. But the storm was closing in. The next morning, my hacker friend, Mia, called with a lead. She'd dug up encrypted files from a Vantage server, proof they'd known about the warehouse's safety violations for years. But there was more, a hit list. Names of activists who'd gotten too close. Lucas's name was at the top. "We need to get these files to someone who can use them," I said, showing Lucas the printouts. "A journalist. Maybe. Someone outside Vantage's reach." He nodded, but his jaw was tight. "There's a reporter at the Times. She's been sniffing around Vantage for months. If we can get these to her, it could blow the whole thing open." We made a plan to meet the reporter, Sarah and Gwen, at a crowded cafe in Manhattan. But as we stepped out of my apartment, a black SUV screeched to a stop across the street. Two men in dark suits got out, their eyes locked on us. Lucas grabbed my hand, and we ran, ducking through alleys and weaving through crowds. My heart pounded, not just from the chase, but from the way his hand felt in mine, steady even in the chaos. We lost them in the subway, but the close call shook us both. At the cafe, Sarah took the files, her eyes widening as she skimmed them. "This is explosive," she said. "But you two need to lay low. Vantage won't let this go quietly." That night, back at my place, Lucas was quieter than usual. He sat on the couch, staring at the floor, his hands clasped tightly. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If something happens to me, promise you'll keep going. Promise you'll make sure they pay." "Don't talk like that," I snapped, my chest tightening. "Nothing's going to happen to you." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "You don't know what you've done for me. Before you, I was just surviving. You make me want to be better." I crossed the room and pulled him into my arms, holding him like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. "We're in this together," I said. "No matter what." But deep down, I knew the truth. We were playing a dangerous game, and the odds were stacked against us. The next week was a tightrope walk. Sarah's article hit the front page, exposing Vantage's corruption and sparking lawsuits, protests, and a federal investigation. Lucas and I stayed under the radar, crashing at a friend's cabin upstate, far from the city's chaos. But even in the quiet of the woods, the tension between us simmered not just from the danger, but from the unspoken feelings growing stronger every day. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Lucas took my hand and led me to the dock. The air was cool, the water reflecting the fading light. "I've never had this," he said, his voice soft. "Someone who'd risk everything for me." I squeezed his hand, my heart swelling. "You're worth it, Lucas. You always were." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and then he kissed me, slow and deep, like he was pouring every unspoken word into it. For the first time, I let myself believe we could have a future beyond the fight. But the past wasn't done with us. 2 days later, Mia called with bad news. Vantage had hired private contractors to track us down. They'd found the cabin. We had hours, maybe less, before they closed in. "We need to move," I said, grabbing our bags. But Lucas shook his head, his expression resolute. "No more running," he said. "I started this. I need to end it." He pulled out a USB drive, one he hadn't shown me before. "More evidence," he explained. "Enough to put Vantage's CEO behind bars for life. But it's risky. If we send this to Sarah, they'll come for us hard." I looked at him, the man I'd saved, the man I'd fallen for, and made a choice. "Then we do it together." We drove to a small library in a nearby town, using their Wi-Fi to upload the files to Sarah. As the progress bar ticked up, Lucas leaned against me, his head on my shoulder. "If we make it out of this," he whispered, "I want a life with you. A real one." "We will," I promised, though my gut twisted with fear. The files uploaded just as headlights flashed outside. 3 men burst into the library, guns drawn. I shoved Lucas behind a shelf, my paramedic training kicking into calm. "Assess. Act." I grabbed a heavy book and threw it, distracting one of them long enough for us to bolt out the back door. We ran through the woods, branches tearing at our skin, until we reached a clearing. But they were faster. A shot rang out, and Lucas stumbled, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, and my world narrowed to him. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against the wound, my training taking over even as panic clawed at me. "Stay with me," I begged, my voice breaking. He smiled weakly, his hand reaching for mine. "You saved me again," he said, his voice fading. "I love you, Ethan." I don't know how long I held him, screaming for help, until sirens wailed in the distance. The police arrived, drawn by Sarah's tip after she received the files. The contractors were arrested, and Lucas was rushed to a hospital. I sat by his bed for days, refusing to leave, praying he'd pull through. He did. A month later, Vantage's CEO was indicted, their empire crumbling under the weight of the truth. Lucas and I moved to a small town in Vermont, far from the city's shadows. We bought a fixer-upper house, spending our days painting walls and our nights wrapped in each other's arms. One evening, as we sat on our porch, watching the stars, Lucas turned to me. "You gave me a reason to keep fighting," he said. "Not just against them, but for us." I kissed him, my heart full. "We saved each other," I said. And in that quiet moment, I knew we'd built something stronger than any Buildinga love that could withstand even the darkest truths.